Join former FBI senior forensic examiners Becky Passmore and Stacey Eldridge as they dig into the world of digital forensics, one bite at a time. Now leading their own consulting firms and educating the next generation of cyber sleuths. These badass babes of digital forensics bring sharp insight, real-world case experience, and a dose of humor to the bits and bytes that build today's investigations. From deep dives into business email compromise and ransomware attacks, Becky's specialty, to cracking the complexities of iPhone forensics, Stacey's obsession, this podcast delivers insider knowledge for professionals, students, and true crime techies alike. If you've ever wondered what really happens when the digital trail is all that's left, tune in and start parsing the truth.
Welcome to Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time. This podcast explores digital evidence, forensic investigations, and the real stories that happen behind the screens and inside the courtroom. I'm Stacey, and with me, as always, is Becky. And Becky and I have some fun news to share with you today. We finally got around to setting up the Patreon membership. So if you're a podcast lover, you're familiar with Patreon and being able to support podcasters through that avenue. And if you join the Patreon, you'll get some cool perks and some exclusive members-only merchandise. And we also got the merchandise store up. There's not everything in there, but there is some darn good stuff in there right now. And if you're a Patreon member, you'll get a merchandise discount as well at the store. And we're adding new stuff on both sites. So if you're interested in getting some swag or supporting the podcast to help us achieve our goals of sending people to IASIS and things of that nature, make sure to check the show notes because we're going to put the links to get in there as well. And we'll share it on socials too. But let's dig into tonight's episode. Becky, what are we talking about in this episode?
Well, today, this episode is called The 12 Invoices. It's a true story that I actually lived through while I was working at the FBI. It's a case about digital evidence, legal authority, expert testimony, and what can happen when forensic work collides with courtroom procedures.
Sounds like this episode is going to have everything we love to talk about. But before we begin, we want to mention that there are some identifying details that are going to be excluded from this discussion. What actually matters is the process, the lessons learned, and the responsibility that comes to being entrusted to uncover and explain the digital evidence. And so, Becky, you told me this begins all the way back in 2011.
Yeah, can you believe that? 2011. At the time, obviously, I was working as a digital forensic examiner at the FBI for the CART program. And like many cases that we do all the forensic work. This one didn't begin with computers. It began with legal authority, as all cases should.
Now, this might be surprising to some listeners because some people have the impression that cases just start by someone opening up the laptop and starting to search for stuff.
Right. And some people do believe that's how you get into a computer. So that is the common assumption. But digital forensics does not begin at that keyboard. And especially not on scene. It begins with some type of legal authority and a scope, very much like what you and I do in our forensic consulting, right? We have to have some authority, we have to have some scope. An examiner cannot simply decide to search out a computer out of curiosity or a hunch that evidence might be there. There must be lawful authority and clearly defined boundaries. In this case, the allegations of fraud and kickbacks had triggered this criminal investigation, and investigators had obtained a search warrant, and I was called to assist with executing that search warrant.
Now, Becky, can you share a little bit more with our listeners what you mean by assisting with executing a search warrant? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it means that they are going to secure the scene, right? So they're going to go execute a search warrant based on their legal authority. They're going to secure the scene. And then myself, as a professional support, is going to make entry once the scene is secure and take control of all the digital evidence devices. So it also means that I'm brought there to identify, preserve, and document the digital evidence that's within that scope, listed in that search warrant and authorized by the court. And that distinction matters. I wasn't there, obviously, to decide guilt or innocence. I was there to expand and help with the investigation. And my responsibility when I was on scene was the evidence.
And having that legal authority and following the legal authority matters just as much as the technology itself.
100%. That absolutely. The warrant defines what investigators are legally permitted to search and seize. And just as importantly, it defines the limits. Forensic work is then governed by both the science and law. If evidence is collected outside of that authority or mishandled, you can jeopardize its admissibility and undermine the integrity of the entire case.
And I think TV and movies, basically that CSI effect, has created the image that investigators can simply look through anything they want whenever they look. And we both know from real life that legal authority can certainly be tricky in more ways than one. And we could probably do a whole episode just on the tricky things we've run into with the search warrants or other legal authority, consent, stuff like that.
That is so true. In real investigations, they don't work that way. Honestly, they shouldn't. Digital devices hold enormous amounts of personal and business information. So that legal authority and forensic discipline have to go hand in hand in every investigation.
Okay, so take us back to where the search warrant begins when you're entering the scene. Where are you? What do you remember?
So I just remember, trying to be as focused as possible. I was the only card examiner on scene. There was a couple of agents. We were at a small business, and, executing a search warrant isn't dramatic the way people imagine. It can be, sometimes it could be, but it's structured, it's controlled, it's methodical. The lead agent handles, like I said, securing the scene and questioning the subjects. And then my focus is, once they have all that taken care of, preserving that digital evidence. And I encountered there were 2 desktop computers, and they were both powered on.
Okay, so it was 2011. Was it significant, or did it matter that they were turned on?
Yeah, it always matters, right? But to most people, a computer being turned on may not sound important, but to a digital forensic examiner, it immediately changes how you think, because active systems can hold that volatile information that disappears the moment they're shut down. So being able to preserve that digital evidence begins with the instant you encounter it and capturing the memory of those computers while they're powered on, and also assessing them to make sure that there are no encryption processes that if you shut it down, it would encrypt the data.
Okay. So you kind of gone through, what's going through your mind. What did you do as you approached these 2 computers?
Yep, just preservation, not curiosity, not discovery, just that total preservation process in your mind. We all always have to remember that digital evidence is fragile. The condition of the system matters, how it's handled matters, and maintaining its integrity becomes your responsibility from the moment forward. So one day, maybe months or years later, you might be standing or sitting in a courtroom explaining exactly what you did, which in this case I did, and you need certainty and facts, not guesses.
So right there at the business, one of the first things that's happening as part of that preservation is chain of custody.
Absolutely. It's immediately happening. The documenting, preserving, and the accountability all begin there. That's why they have us there. That's why they bring us on scene. They want that evidence collected and preserved in the manner of the right methodical processes. And that chain of custody is simply that document that is documenting the history of who handles the evidence, when, where, and what, and under what conditions. So that documentation protects everyone, the investigation, the examiner, and ultimately the integrity of the judicial process.
And I'm assuming, it's a bigger search. There's many of you there. Every field office handles searches a little bit differently, but I'm assuming you were at least listed as the person who collected the digital evidence.
Yep, that is correct. Yep, I was the one that was absolutely collecting the digital evidence. And there is always that awareness that a warrant is being executed. So I just stay focused on the evidence. And there's, that's just part of our forensic work. You stay grounded, your role, you get distracted by emotion or speculation. then errors can happen. So once the computers are preserved and secured, the next step is to transport them back to the lab, and the next step is to start that acquisition process.
So what was it like inside the business when you got in there? Because you're in there after the sworn law enforcement personnel have cleared the scene. They have the guns. We didn't have guns, so we came in afterwards after it was safe. And so sometimes people are still in there and sometimes they're not. So what was happening at the business? Were people aware of what was going on? What did you observe?
Yeah, the owner was there, and obviously the agents do their role in taking the owner. At that time, you could call them a subject because they're part of an investigation, and they take them to the side and they start their interview process. They want to know what they know. They have legal authority to be there, and so they're likely going over that legal authority, and I'm laser focused on just trying to get to the evidence and make sure the evidence is protected.
Okay. So do you remember, you're done looking at the computers. Did you have to do any imaging on site, or did you do a shutdown, or did you pull the plug?
Yeah, I did the RAM capture. And then I would have shut it down, and I'm pretty sure I would have done a shutdown. Can't remember. 2011, that was a little while ago. But I would have done a shutdown.
Yeah, I would say the days of pulling the plug for most of us were certainly over by 2011, if not 4 or 5 years before that.
Right. And so
every situation is different though, right?
Truly is. And so then I would have not imaged it on scene. I did not image it on scene. I took it back to the lab so that I could image it in the lab in a more controlled environment.
Okay. So what gives you kind of that authority to start working in the laboratory on this? What are you looking for? What's filled out for you there from the FBI side?
Yeah, so that warrant is going to establish that legal authority, but then we need a request for service, which then establishes our forensic scope. And again, going back to the fact that you and I have our own consulting, when we develop a statement of work, it is that scope of our analysis, our processes. So the warrant answers that legal question, what authority exists? The request for service answers the operational one, what am I specifically being asked to do? Examiners don't wander through that data. They don't start looking for anything interesting. Maybe there was some examiners like that, but anyway, we work within a defined scope, we follow the request, and we definitely document those findings accordingly.
So breaking it down is the search warrant or whatever your legal authority gets the evidence into your lab, but the request for service guides what your case agent or the client wants you to look for first.
Yes, and the request for service focused on that fraud and kickback scheme allegations of this specifically asked for this investigation, where I was to analyze evidence for invoices that were believed to have been associated with this criminal activity. And so that was my pure objective, not everything on computers, not unrestricted searching, just invoices related to an alleged crime. My request for scope was to find an invoice in relation to this fraud and kickback scheme.
Now, some service requests are better written than others. Did they give you some pretty good details, or did you have to kind of coach and say, could you give me a little more detail than just search for invoice?
Yeah. No, this agent was really good. He's a white collar crime agent, very good at fraud and accounting type investigations. So he gave me specific search terms, right? And so
awesome.
I was, I focused on, he wanted me to find an invoice that involved the subject and the organization. And I found, that's exactly what I was doing. I was looking for that one invoice and not trying to get out of the scope or look for anything else.
So it sounds like you had, a good service request with details, some keyword searches to help you find those invoices. How did you start and where did it lead you? Did you find an invoice?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, he gave really great search terms. So started searching and invoices. This eventually led me to something a little bit more than I was expecting. But, I was able to find the one invoice that he was interested in.
Okay, so you're in the lab, the computers are preserved, you've processed the evidence, you have the request, you're getting ready to look. What happens exactly? You found one invoice. Walk us through it.
Well, so I found the invoice and I went ahead and I started creating my report, right? Because his scope was to find the one invoice.
So Becky, you found that one invoice. From your perspective, was that mission accomplished? You're done?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like I got what he wanted. And at that point, yeah, the request for service was addressed. I had located what he was looking for and I documented. I created a report. So from a forensic standpoint, the examination could have ended right there. One invoice, one report, one documented finding, done.
But this story isn't called The One Invoice.
It does not. No, and this is where the things began to change. After the first report was completed, the investigating agent submitted a supplemental request for service.
And I think that's important because we're talking about scope again. It's not uncommon for them to come back and ask for more after they've gotten a taste, right?
That's right. So, he asked for the one invoice, he asked for the search terms, and so now he's realized that this investigation could have been during a longer period of time. So that supplemental request now redefines or expands that investigative objective. So they create a new question and one that happens, and once that happens, me as an examiner returns back to that evidence under that new scope. And then the agent wanted to know whether or not there were additional invoices that would be connected to this alleged crime. And that became the new request. And so in the middle of all of that, we have to remember that that invoice he was looking for was an active file on the computer.
Okay. An active file is what you found the first go around. You've got this supplemental request. Did it surprise you regarding what he was asking for the second time around?
No, because I've had that happen. I'm sure you've had that happen where investigators then they evolve, they get a new timeline, new information starts to emerge, and then it's still within that legal authority. It's still within somewhat of that scope. Now he's got some additional details. And so one finding just creates more questions. And instead of trying to do it verbally, he'd call me up on the phone and say, hey, can you go back in that? He was one of those agents that was very detailed and just put this next request in so we would follow that whole chain of process. Because remember, I've already created one report.
Yep, you closed it out. And so now you're going deeper. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so, when I'm going deeper, I'm moving beyond what we normally see. Like I said, that was an active file. People think of computers in terms of active files and folders, but forensic analysis can examine areas of storage the average most users never consider, including unallocated space.
Okay, so unallocated space is a good term to define for some of our listeners. Do you want to tell us more about that?
Yeah, definitely. The simplest way to understand it is this. A computer tracks which storage locations are actively assigned the files. That's allocated space. Unallocated space is storage the operating system considers available for reuse. But available doesn't mean empty. When files are deleted, traces and sometimes fully recoverable content can remain there. So to a user, they appear gone. To a forensic examiner, they may still exist. And those are golden eggs for us.
Golden eggs.
Yes.
I like it. Okay. So when people delete something, it's not necessarily gone.
Nope. It's not, and that's why unallocated space matters during an examination, especially when you're trying to determine whether additional evidence exists. That supplemental request required me to identify additional invoices if they were there, so I conducted a deeper examination, and eventually I began recovering invoices from unallocated space.
Do you want to tell me a little bit more about how you tried to find these invoices in unallocated? Because you're going deeper, you're going beyond that original invoice.
Yeah, and so that data is not the same file structure that you are used to looking at. You have a file name with an easily path to communicate that in a report. It's just now you're starting to see data, a location that has the same form that your invoice has, but it's not on a document. But the data, the information is there, it's complete. And so as I start to recover one, then I find another one. And the interesting part about it was that there were just small changes on the invoice. So it might have been like the month. Obviously, the month was changed on the invoice. The amount was changed on the invoice. Maybe some details on the invoice, some small details on the invoice, they were changed. And because they were just small, they were all still located in the same area in the unallocated space.
And so did you carve for the files? Like, were they Word documents or they PDFs? Did you carve for a file type, or did you just like keyword search for invoice to help you get started?
I keyword searched for what was originally on the first invoice, and it kept leading me to hits for additional information. And so I was recovering it. I was not necessarily looking for, carving for a specific Word document or text file or Excel or anything like that.
So after you found that original invoice and say you found one more, what did that feel like? What was that moment like? Can you walk us through a little bit more?
Yeah, because the more I found one, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. This falls within that same structure, and it's the next month. And then I found another one. It was the next month. And the amounts would change, and I would calculate, okay, this one is worth this much, and then this one is worth this much. Oh, and then here's the next month, and this one's amount changed. And so you start to feel that adrenaline and your heart pump, and you get so excited because you're like, oh, there is more evidence on here. And based on what his request was, I was digging deeper and finding the evidence that he was needing.
And so you found, based on the title of the show, 11 more invoices that were all different?
Yeah, 11 more invoices. The interesting part about that was, if you remember when we go back to that original file, we always talk about reading that metadata in that original file. And in a Word document, in that metadata, it contains how many times that document's been revised. And the metadata said that document had been revised 11 times. So here I was completing the picture, right?
Yeah.
That document's been completed, edited 11 times, and here is the original. And I had 11 more revisions of that document.
So you found 11 more files. Did you write a second report?
I did. So now I'm more detailed because...
Well, you had to do a lot more stuff, right? It wasn't just sort of like the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. And so, being able to now write this report, because these 12 invoices, once added up, they collectively totaled $1 million. So that also gave a bigger picture, right? They're looking for scope and intent and motive. The investigators have a role that they're looking at. And here I am reviving all this that they were looking for. And then I created a second report.
Okay. And in the second report, did you document some of the details of the metadata from those files in the report so the case agent would understand more about what you found?
Yes. So the metadata was critical for the original document to state because going and finding something in unallocated space, it doesn't have the same structure that we are used to seeing. And so now explaining how the original document led to the next invoice that led to the next invoice. And so then putting this all back together in a timeline truly tells that story and helps to explain the bigger picture.
Well, and because you had to carve all these files, you don't have the traditional created, modified timestamps that we're used to using. So you had to get all of that information out of the metadata.
That's exactly right. And so this is that significant evolution. And at that point, we all start to understand something, me and the investigator. And so what began as that simple focused request involving one single invoice had grown into documented findings supported by recovery and metadata analysis. And that's even the bigger responsibility in forensic work that you and I have to do. So you follow that evidence where it leads you, and even when the answer becomes bigger than expected, you still document and you are very thorough about it. Now it should be like, so now you have 2 reports.
So now you have 2 reports. First, you've got the documentation of finding that original invoice, just one. And now you have a second report going through 11 different invoices that you recovered. And you have to talk about the metadata that kind of, makes the case better. At what point did you realize that you were going to have to testify about this?
Yeah, I got that subpoena request, right? So I eventually was called to testify. And honestly, that's where the story just takes a whole nother turn for itself that I obviously never expected.
This episode is powered by Ace Forensics. Ace Forensics has been building computer systems since 1983, and they deliver high-performance workstations, laptops, and servers built for today's digital forensic tools. They offer unmatched value and the industry's only 5-year warranty. If you're tired of waiting on slow machines, head over to aceforensics.com for a competitive quote today and have Ace Forensics build the systems you deserve. And now, back to our episode. As it so often does when you move from the lab to the courtroom, it's 2 very different situations, isn't it?
And it was. They are such different worlds. The laboratory is that controlled, methodical, and quiet space. You work with evidence documentation and process, but the courtroom introduces something entirely different. That procedure, strategy, as we always talk about, human emotion, and unpredictability.
Were you nervous heading into the courtroom? What was this number of testimony? Do you remember?
It was number 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lucky number
So
3.
I'd had a little bit of experience, but I was not expecting what happened. So I think you and I both know that any responsible expert witness feels a certain weight before taking the stand, that nervousness, not fear, but some form of responsibility, right? And testimony is different from analysis. In the lab, your findings exist in reports, you talk about them and all that stuff. But in court, you have to explain. You really have to do a good job in explaining what kind of work you've done. And it has to be clear and truthful to the attorneys, the jurors, and the judge. So this is in a way that everyone can understand.
Mm-hmm. So your butt hits the chair as the expert witness. You're not just there for one side, are you? I mean, who are you there to advocate for?
Now, my role isn't to win a case for the prosecution or defeat the defense. My responsibility is to testify truthfully about the work I performed. That obligation, no matter what side you're on, never changes. You are there for the evidence, not the strategy and the politics that we know comes with cases in court.
Yeah, we get to be a little bit removed from it. At least, we're focusing on the facts and the data and the artifacts when we're testifying, when we're sitting in the witness stand.
Yeah.
So before you walked into the courtroom, did you have a chance to meet with the prosecutor about this case and have any discussion at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Good.
The meeting became one of the most important parts of the story.
Okay.
Yeah, so before the testimony began, the prosecutor informed me that we were talking about my reports and that she had not turned the second report over to the defense.
What? Your
Exactly.
best report, the one with all of the details, all the really good stuff, did not get turned over for
Didn't get turned
discovery?
over. No.
It's a tale as old as time. Nobody's reading the reports we're writing.
That's exactly right. And so she says the second report, and she tells me we're just not going to discuss it. We're not going to bring up the second report. We're only going to bring up the first report and the original evidence. The original invoice, excuse me. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not even the good part, right? But I'm also thinking to myself, is that even legal? Don't you have to turn over discovery? So I had a lot of things going through this brain of mine, like, well, that's the good stuff. And I don't even think that's right. I was right. So that's
I was like, what's your reaction kind of at, like, where does it go after you kind of have all this stuff whirling through your mind? What happens next? Do you say something? Do you just sit there? Do you get up and leave?
I remember I just kind of sat there and looked at her, and I probably had my mouth open, like, don't say nothing, but say something, So I was just really confused because I knew what was in that second report. I mean, it was really good information. And I also understood that disclosure matters. You want to be careful here because this is very important for our listeners. Discovery obligations and legal strategy belong to the attorneys. That isn't my role. My responsibility was, always stayed the same. Answer the questions, truthfully about the work I performed. So I prepared to discuss only the first report.
Well, and I mean, we do have some involvement in the discovery process, as in when they say, make a copy of the forensic image to provide to the opposing side. Like,
Sure.
It's our
Yeah.
job to do that in a timely manner and to provide hashes with it and to make sure that after we copy it, the hashes match. That's our sort of stuff. But it's not our job to be like, this is all the evidence I produced and here are the reports. Like, we're not involved of the physicality of one side giving it to the other.
No, that's exactly right. As an expert witness, you just generally trust that the attorneys are managing the legal procedure and the disclosure appropriately. That's their role, right? And
Right.
Mine was to testify. Mine was to create the evidence. Mine was to create the report from the evidence that I found. So when I enter the courtroom, I'm expected to stay limited now to only my first report.
Okay. So you're thinking just one report I'm going to talk about today. You're like, I'm going to be in and out. This is going to be some quick testimony. So you're walking in.
Yeah.
You know what's supposed to be discussed. What do you remember happening as soon as you start talking about the case?
Well, first of all, this whole court process is it has its own atmosphere and dramatic situation. And I remember very clearly it's like 4:45 in the afternoon.
Oh,
And I remember that there was a witness that was sitting with me and they called him and he said, "Oh, I'll be on the stand for a while," because he was our forensic accountant. So,
Okay.
you're thinking, oh, that forensic accountant, they're going to close with him and he's going to come back for a couple hours tomorrow. So I'm in for tomorrow. And he leaves the room and then I hear these running heel footsteps coming down the hallway. And we're on the second floor and the courtroom's down below. And I'm sitting in the prosecutor's office and the door flies open and it's somebody that is with the court and they're like, "You're up." And so now your heart is like beating out of your chest. And so it's just like, I just was like, I'm up. Like, what happened to the forensic accountant? Right. So anyway, we get in there. I took the stand. I focused on what I would always focus on. I remained that professional, answering those clearly, aligned questions all about your education, your knowledge, your expertise. And so, we're getting into the evidence and then initially everything unfolded as exactly as expected. And then the prosecutor, all of a sudden, she starts asking about my role, my search warrant execution, preservation of evidence, a request for service, examination. And so everything stayed within the agreed scope.
Okay. So you're thinking, this is fine. This is what I expect.
Yeah.
Some easy questions.
Peasy. In and out, right? Off the stand, just like the guy before me. And then something changed. The prosecutor asked a question, and I recognized immediately it was tied to the second report. I said, and the report she had already told me she had not turned over, she was asking me a question about.
So is this the same attorney? Just to be clear, this is the same attorney who said, I did not turn it over. I will not ask you questions about this. She is now asking you a question about the stuff she said is off limits.
Yeah, and everything just slowed down. I understood the problem instantly. You're all of a sudden are like, there's a problem here, and how can I get out of this problem? So I knew which report she was referencing, and I knew we had agreed not to discuss it. So I was caught between two realities. That report existed, but we weren't supposed to be talking about it.
So, I mean, I guess you had to make a decision, right? Because they've asked you a question and you have to say something. So what did you do?
Yeah. So again, let's talk about strategies, right? So I said, I asked her to repeat the question because maybe if she repeats the question, she's going to realize, oh, I'm not supposed to be asking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't because I hadn't heard her. It was because I hoped she would hear herself and realize that she had asked and remembered our earlier conversation.
Kind of giving her a do-over moment.
Do-over. But she repeated the question, Stacy.
No.
She repeated the question. And then once she did, I was left with my obligation as a witness to answer it truthfully. So I began to answer. Right. Well, and I start to answer, and I remember like the words coming out of my mouth, and immediately the defense jumps up and objects. And
Okay.
so much so that I believe when the defense jumped up and objected, I probably got startled and jumped in my seat.
Were you surprised that the objection occurred? I mean, other than like the yelling of objection, sometimes that catches you off guard. But
yeah,
but that it was going to be said. Were you surprised?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, I kind of expected it. Yeah. So it happened. I knew why it happened, and the issue that had existed privately between me and the prosecutor now became public in that courtroom.
Okay, so walk us through it. What's going on?
So the judge didn't rule right away. Like she objected, and then he called him to the bench. And you've talked about that before. You go to the bench, they turn on this fuzzy noise. You can't hear what's going on. So I can't hear anything, but I can feel the tension because I know the story. I'm in the middle of the story, so I know what's happening. You wait, you watch, you realize something is about to happen, and you can't hear what they're talking about. So I sat there while the bench took place, and when it ended, the judge immediately dismissed the jurors.
It's happened to me. It's never good when the jurors are dismissed when you're on the stand. So were you concerned, Becky?
Well, so I was confused. Again, Stacy, I'm in the middle of this. I know all the answers because I've been explained that this didn't occur. So here I am. I still see this moment like it was vivid yesterday. And I can also tell you that once the jurors were gone, the judge turned to the defense and asked for their response. And it was a female attorney, and the defense stated their position very clearly, that I'm an expert. This expert on the stand here, meaning me, is testifying to a report that they never received. And I'll tell you, Stacey, I wanted to go, that's right, but I didn't. I just sat there. I didn't shake my head.
Yeah, you have to be careful not to like nod along.
No. Mm-hmm.
You gotta be, have that neutral face.
So I felt like I was at the front. I mean, I was at the front of the room. I was in the middle of this big conversation that's about to happen, and I know all the answers.
Okay. So what do you remember about the judge in that moment?
Well, the judge, he was sitting next to me. So I was like from here to that wall right there, and he was sitting next to me. And when she answers that they don't have the report, I kind of just looked over at him, and he's looking down at this big old book. They look at books all the time, and they're the whole federal stuff. And I just remember him looking down at that book, and he wasn't paying attention to what was going on. And when he asked that prosecutor for her response, she started crying uncontrollably. In
the courtroom? It's like an AUSA.
It's an AUSA.
Okay.
She's crying
in the courtroom. Okay.
Uncontrollably and hysterically. And she told the judge, she hadn't turned over the report, that she just asked me a question about.
So we've got some drama in the courtroom.
A lot of drama.
From the AUSA.
Total.
What was it like being on the witness stand during this moment, observing?
Again, I just wanted a bucket of popcorn. I just wanted a bucket, because I know all the answers, right? The judge is getting mad.
Right.
The defense is sitting over there going, we don't have what she's talking about. And the AUSA is standing in front at the podium crying hysterically to where she's whimpering. It's that kind of cry. And I was just like, what? Am I in a movie theater right now?
The poor courtroom recorder. How do you, do you just, type in AUSA begins sobbing uncontrollably? Whimper, I don't know. Or do you, document the duration? Dang, I
you
wish we could have found those transcripts. Dang it.
I was
Ugh.
I was about to say, I know you looked for the transcripts and
Yeah.
Pacer and you couldn't find it. And I said, well, maybe you couldn't find it because the court reporter couldn't record all of the hysterical crying.
Ugh.
But, it just seemed like everything was happening in slow motion. And
Yeah. As it
again,
does
I
when you're on
felt
the witness stand. It does.
right.
It seems very slow.
And I just felt like that courtroom no longer felt orderly. And I could feel the tension coming off this judge over here. And that that judge, I can remember it like it happened yesterday. That slow motion occurred with him hearing this uncontrollably hysterical cry. And
Uh-huh.
he comes up looking from his book like a slow motion and he just stares her down.
Uh-huh.
And it was like, what is happening right now? And he said, attorneys in my chamber now.
And then what?
And everyone left.
Okay.
They left. The attorneys, the judge, everyone. They just left. The jurors were already gone. And suddenly I was sitting alone on the witness stand. No attorneys, no jurors, no judge, just me and the court reporter right there. So
Okay.
it was honestly one of the strangest moments of my professional career that I can recall.
So it's just you and the courtroom reporter. Like, how long do you wait? What are you doing?
So I actually sat there for a few minutes and then I looked around and I finally looked over at the court reporter and I said, what am I supposed to do?
It's a valid question. And most of the time you don't get asked those questions. Like, what could I do? Did the courtroom recorder type it? And Becky says, what do I do?
I don't know. I don't recall. I really feel like that's the reason why those records are not in Pacer. It's because it was such a chaotic mess.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was probably more frustration because from my perspective, this turmoil that occurred, it had been created by negligence around her responsibility of disclosure. And yet there I was sitting in the middle of it, not because of anything in the forensic work, but because of a procedural failure. And that distinction mattered.
Yeah, it's an important point because, the evidence and the analysis, like the things you did weren't the problem. However, the problem was the procedure that was not followed after you turned over all your stuff.
Exactly. The forensic work stood on its own. Like, this was good findings. These reports existed. They were documented. But here we are in a courtroom procedure that introduces responsibilities beyond my control. And when those responsibilities fail, everyone is going to feel the impact. Eventually, the court clerk finally dismissed me from the stand. And I just walked back to the prosecutor's office where I was at before.
Okay. So did you ever find out like what happened behind closed doors?
I didn't know what happened behind those closed doors. I was just still trying to understand what I had just witnessed. But later, the attorneys returned, including defense counsel, to that prosecutor's office. And
Okay,
then
they all came back to the office you were sitting in and
Yeah.
waiting.
And then
Okay.
they went into this other little room and they had their own meeting. And that's when I learned what would happen next. Because I had been the last witness of the day, the jurors were excused, all of that. They explained to me that I would be recalled the next morning, and the AUSA would ask me the final question that she had asked right before the objection, and that would conclude my testimony. We would not get into the second report.
That's so interesting because sometimes like I've seen it happen in trials where like on the appeal process where I'm in the examiner, like on the first trial, you're going through and reading the transcripts and one of the sides is like, well, generally the defense, I never got that stuff for discovery, and they kind of argue back and forth about it in court. And sometimes they're like, okay, well, can we adjourn and can you look at the stuff and how long do you need it and da. But maybe sounds like didn't go that way at all. So
Did not.
I don't.
In fact, it went the defense's way, and the defense was they don't want that evidence in. And clearly, there's a reason why. When those invoices total $1 million, they're documented in a completely different report. They don't want that in, so that was their strategic move.
Yeah, so the defense did a good job arguing whatever they had to convince the judge to keep it out instead of like, giving me more time, at the 11th hour, which I mean, that's not awesome for anybody.
Yeah, it's frustrating because you watch it unfold and you know that your work that you value so much is never going to be talked about.
Well, I think a lot of the work we do never gets talked about.
I 100% agree with you on that. Yeah.
Because you're on the stand, they skip questions, and sometimes it's a super important question. Even now, a lot of the work I do on the criminal defense side, sometimes, if I'm doing a good job, it's not going to trial. Sometimes I'm doing a good job, I don't write a report either. So it's
Mhm.
the way it happens on the other side of the aisle is interesting when you're
Yeah.
doing a good job.
Yeah, for sure. And so these are the things we have to remember. The circumstances may change, your obligation shouldn't.
Right.
That became one of the biggest lessons from this experience. No matter how chaotic things became, they become around you, your
Right.
responsibility as an expert witness stays the same. You stay professional, you stay truthful, you stay grounded in your work. And so the next day I returned, I took the stand again. The prosecutor asked that final question, I answered it, and that concluded my testimony, and they dismissed me the proper way.
So that sounds anticlimactic. Like you didn't even get a cross examination?
Did not. Did not.
Well, because what
No.
evidence did you even get in? Did you even talk about the first report, or just the fact that like you went to the search warrant and imaged the computer and you did some searching and wrote a report, and is
But
that
we
it?
talked about the one report.
Oh, the one
It
report
was
you did talk about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
the original invoice, the one report, and that's all we
Mhm.
got to talk about.
Yeah. Well, that's no fun.
And so my role in the courtroom then ends, but the case continued and eventually the verdict came back.
Okay. What was the verdict?
There was two parties and it was not guilty on all parties.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you think about that verdict?
It was disappointing, and I want to answer that carefully because disappointment isn't the same as disagreeing with the legal process, and I was not disagreeing with the legal process, but I believe evidence existed that was never fully presented. When you spend that much time preserving evidence, conducting analysis, documenting findings, preparing testimony, you naturally want the process to function in a way where all the relevant evidence is available for consideration. So, yeah, it was disappointing.
And I think this is where an important conversation can begin amongst people because, people assume or maybe take for granted that the truth and the verdict are the same thing every single time.
Yeah, and they're not. And that may be one of the hardest lessons for people outside of the legal system to understand. Evidence matters, procedures matters,
Yes.
and disclosure matters. But verdicts emerge from a process governed by legal rules and courtroom decisions. So truth and verdict don't always feel identical, and that realization stays with me.
Well, and I think the rules and procedures are so important because you have to realize if you are not following the rules, policies, and procedures that are fundamental to everything that you're supposed to be doing, and then the other side finds out that you're not following the rules, then they're going to get evidence tossed, or they're going to work really hard to get some evidence tossed. And then if they're successful, there can be some very important evidence that gets tossed, and that is going to change the case and what happens in the courtroom. Because if you don't get to talk about the 11 other invoices, that can make a huge impact on the jury because, okay, there's one invoice. Is that enough for reasonable doubt? And, you're not the only person with evidence. There probably should be some other people there making the case. And you don't necessarily know what that evidence is or what the case
Mm-mm.
is that they're making to compel the jury to make their verdict one way or the other. But you knew what you had and you
Yep.
knew what you lost.
Yep. And we don't control discovery. We don't control attorney strategy. We don't control courtroom rulings. And we certainly don't control verdicts. What we do control is ourselves. And that's what we have to remember.
Mm-hmm. Has this experience changed your view of testifying in the courtroom?
It just, I want to say, I think when people hear a story like this, they sometimes focus only on the drama, the objection, the chambers conference, the prosecutor crying, the judge's reaction, and they're memorable moments. But for me, it's just a deeper lesson about ethics and professionalism. As a digital forensic examiner and expert witness, your credibility is one of your most valuable professional assets, and credibility comes from consistency, sound methodology, objectivity, and professionalism. Even when a catastrophic procedural fail unfolds around you, you still have responsibility to remain professional. You can't become emotional, you can't become partisan, and you can't abandon your role. So you stay grounded in the evidence and in your obligation to tell the truth.
Yeah. And, that's the ethical heart of this story is, relying on the facts, presenting the facts and the artifacts and explaining what they mean. And I think there's a lot of examiners who will not say, like, I thought this person was guilty. I thought this person was innocent. I think we will say stuff like, I thought this was compelling evidence because of this, or I certainly thought this may help place a person here or there, or I certainly thought this would provide some evidence of doubt.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
those who are just truly in that digital forensic examiner role, I don't think you're going to find most of us saying, yes, they were guilty. Yes, they were innocent. Because you can't go into it with that thinking they are guilty or they are innocent, and when you think along those black and white lines, you're going to be biased and you're going to be searching for biased evidence. And so it's important to stay away from that.
That's 100% true. And we have to focus on that. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of lessons learned here. And the biggest lesson for me was, I don't control any situation other than what I control when I do my reports and I do my examination.
Now, Becky, 15 years later, as you're looking back at this case, what has stayed with you the most about it? Why did you want to talk about it tonight?
Yeah, because I maybe it'll help someone else. But honestly, the image of just sitting there alone on the witness stand, not because it was dramatic, but because it captured something important. As experts, we sometimes find ourselves inside of those circumstances that we didn't create and we can't control. And in those moments, it's our responsibility to continue to stay the same. Tell the truth, protect your integrity, remain professional. And then because digital forensics isn't simply about recovering evidence, it's about that stewardship of truth. And that responsibility doesn't disappear when things go wrong.
And I think this is a powerful place to end this episode. Becky, thank you so much for digging in and sharing this story with us.
Yeah, thank you to our listeners. If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to leave us a rating and a review. It helps new listeners find us. So until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and as always, keep parsing the truth one bite at a time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us to get notified the next time a new episode drops. If you can do more, head on over to parsingthetruth.com and donate by clicking on the donate button. Parsing the Truth is a nonprofit organization, and we are raising money to send a new digital forensic examiner to IASIS training next year in Orlando. Thanks.